So let me get into the meat and the crux for this content today. So let's understand why this session exists today, right? We need to understand that quality as a concept doesn't thrive when it's enforced, right? But it thrives when it's embraced. So any tool that you work with, whether it is a CAPA system, or it is a layered process audit system, or it is managing the whole quality management system, tools do not stick without belief, right? And quality doesn't fail because people don't care. It often fails because systems don't invite ownership. And this is going to be the core theme and the message for the session today, where we'll be talking about how we can own quality as a mindset, how we can invite accountability within every function of quality that we do. And by inviting that ownership and accountability and that belief system within quality, how can we make a sustainable system? And the system we'll be talking about today is Layered Process Auditing. So, we don't have necessarily a quality problem, but rather a belief problem. There is usually a lot of compliance fatigue with quality as a word, with quality as a department, with quality as a function. Oftentimes people think that that department exists to police the work, to micromanage the work. And so we'll be looking into, just rewiring our belief system for quality and what would happen if audits, any sort of audits, either they are layered process auditing, internal auditing, external auditing, what would happen if tomorrow all of those systems were to disappear, right? How will our systems and our organizations function if those systems were to disappear tomorrow? So the question is, would quality improve, decline, or stay the same? If you have comments on this, put them in the chat below on what do you think about if auditing as a system went away, what would happen? Would we improve as a system? Would we decline as a system? Or would we stay the same? I would be interested to hear some nuanced perspectives on that. But let's really begin with disarming and reframing the real problem and addressing the real problem. So before we do that, I want you guys to engage with me in this. So scan that QR code from your phones if you have them. And the question that we have at hand here is, what is a word or an impression or a connotation that comes to your mind when you hear the term audit? So I would love to see engagement on this. If you are able to scan that QR code and become a part of the Slido and put down what you think of the word, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word audit, right? And let's see if once you type in what comes up. Okay, compliance. I see. That's amazing. Checkup, verification, headache. Oh my God, that's perfect, right? I wanted to see what people really feel about audits. You can be honest, you can be candid, you can treat this as an AA session about your frustration with auditing. If you are a person who has experience with auditing, if you are a person who has been an auditee or an auditor, what are your real thoughts about auditing? Policing, all hands on deck, gap identifier, love that. Okay. Accountability. Oh my God. Income. Okay. Policing, headache, findings, paperwork. Paperwork is a great word. I see most people are going with compliance and verification, right? Judging. I see that. Preparation. Somebody just said, they're just like done with auditing. They're like, I cannot with audits. Inspection, all hands on deck. Okay. We got great engagement. Thank you guys for participating in this. We had about 30 people chime in, which is amazing to see what really is the first word that comes to your mind. And from what I see, this is what I like to do. I like to gauge the audience that I'm trying to communicate with, right? So the problem that we're trying to solve here is disarming and reframing the problem. What really is our problem? What's the root cause of why we don't like audits? What's wrong with auditing, right? And so, treasure hunting. That's a great, whoever said that, kudos to you. That is an amazing word. As soon as auditing comes in, you really are treasure hunting sometimes. And it's amazing to see that you guys have put in. So one thing I want to say, a lot of people have put in compliance. Let's see how that word impacts us when we think about audits, right? So a lot of people think about audits and the word that comes up is compliance, but another word that comes up is conformance, right? What is the difference between a compliance and a conformance? Compliance usually is referred to in terms of regulatory bodies involved. If it was a regulatory body involved within the Air Force Commission or within the government, and they were auditing you, at that point it would become a compliance, from what I understand. And conformance is if you are, let's say, for example, doing ISO 9001, right? If you are being audited by a certification body to get to ISO 9001, that would be conformance. So I didn't see any conformance come into this word cloud, but keep that in mind. Keep the word conformance in mind when you think about auditing as well. But I love that some people have been candid and they have said policing with this, because a lot of the times our problem is understanding the concept of auditing. So let's look into a mindset shift, right? And we already saw some of these words come up on our word cloud, because a lot of you lovely people believe that auditing should invite ownership. It should invite accountability. It is meant for continuous improvement. So this is our mindset shift today. We're supposed to reframe the problem, re-understand the problem of auditing, and start rewiring those connotations with the word auditing. So auditing can be used for predictive nature. It is a friendly concept. Let's frame the terms of policing as accountability. Let's think about how audits can empower us to do better, how it can bring cooperation, clarity in your process, transparency in your process, and most of all, customer focus, right? In a quality management system, what we really care about at the end of the day is customer focus, because quality, as you all know, is defined by the customer. So auditing really brings in all these beautiful words as well. And for people who said judging and policing, you shall hold, because we will be going into how we can reframe these concepts and look into developing a layered process audit system. So, why don't audits stick with organizations is a really great question. So I've heard a lot of people usually come up to me and say, well, I tried to do an audit in my organization and it's just me who's doing it, right? I don't like the audit system because they don't stick. They don't have any value that is provided out of them. So why do contemporary audit systems fail? Let's look into that. So most audits usually fail when systems are long done before the checklist does. So, they seem to be systems that are there because they are designed to inspect, not rather to support. And that's one big problem in all of this, is us not being able to understand why audit systems should be created in the first place. They should be created to support systems, not to check or verify or be a micromanager in that system. Another reason why audits fail is because they're owned by quality, right? They're just owned by this one department in an organization, and there's very low accountability for it. So more often than not, it fails. Another mindset that I've seen most people in organizations have is audits are extra work. There is no perceived return on your investment. There is no perceived efforts of when you do an audit, what you get out of it. It's seen as additional work. And we'll try to reframe that, because it's essentially proactive work so that you don't have to firefight the work all the time, right? And these are the gaps in my bucket. These are the gaps why my systems fail, because it's usually that and only one person carrying the system, right? We normalize that failure, that it's only one person who's supposed to own the quality audit system, and they shift, that blame to the person owning that system. And so we will try to reframe how to shift that blame from a people perspective to a design perspective. What's wrong with our audit system as a design? So a lot of the audits fail when they're perceived as judgment instead of learning. And this is exactly what data confirms, right? What we feel about audit is what data confirms. So traditional audits create fear and compliance and not learning. Inspection-driven audits usually end up creating a defensive nature within the organization and pass the audit behavior. More often than not, right before an audit, whether it's internal audit, where it's LPAs, or it's an external audit, we start tying our shoelaces very late on in the game and start thinking of, oh my God, we're going to be checked and inspected tomorrow, so let's try to get our affairs in order. And that is because traditional audits create that fear and that compliance-based system. Another self-determination theory suggests that control-based auditing weakens ownership and engagement, right? If it feels like a surveillance, if it feels like there is no autonomy within the system, we feel that we're shifting that focus from ownership into a control by one person, right? And we do not want that to happen. When audits are embedded as roles-based processes, it confirms that quality becomes a habit, not an event. And that was mentioned in the Toyota way. in the lean leader standard work is that ownership-driven layered process audits enable culture, capability, and reliance, and resilience too. And for people who are within the automotive industry, if you're a part of it, or if you've heard of it, automotive industry is very keen on layered process auditing. It's one of the requirements of the system to have layered process auditings to check your work, because it provides these stage gates at every step of the way where you can check your work before the end of the line sees a bad product, for example. So we want to be able to invite that ownership for our layered process auditing. So let's think about the system that fixes the problem, right? The mindset shift that we talked about in the beginning. Let's think about how we can shift our mindset to fix the real root cause of this problem, which is a cultural ownership. So we have this mindset called playing to win, right? Which is a quality mindset. If you're playing a game, you're supposed to see the best result in it, which is to win. If you're producing something, it has to be high quality. It has to meet all your specifications. And how do we get there is through continuous improvement and lean as a mindset. So let's begin at this belief and this behavior that we see in a lot of organizations, right? Ask yourself when you come up to a procedure or a policy, is it a rule, policy, or procedure? If it is, then is there a clear reason why we still need to do it? So by asking that question, for example, in the terms of, let's say there was a standard work instruction on how to operate an equipment or how to operate a production facility or line, right? Is there a clear reason why we still need to do that work or that process or have that procedure? If the answer is no, then kill the process, right? It has to be a lean process. Let's invite that lean mindset. Now, is it a rule, policy, or procedure? No, it isn't none of those. Let's say, for example, it's just tribal knowledge, right? That we have that we should be doing a certain system or developing a certain audit or auditing in general. If it's not a rule, policy, or procedure, ask yourself, does it matter if we do not do that to begin with? And if the answer is no, then you can kill the system, because if it doesn't matter if you don't do it, if it isn't a rule, policy, or procedure, is there really a reason for it to exist in your organization? Probably not. Now, does it matter if we don't do it, right? Let's get back to that process. And if the answer is yes, the next question, the next purging question that you're asking yourself is there a clear alternative? If there is a clear alternative, then we've hit a milestone, right? We know to ask ourselves that better question. Even in the first series of events that we talked about, is there a clear reason why we still need to do it? Yes. If there is a clear reason, while it's a policy and a procedure or a rule, then ask yourself, is there a clear alternative? If the answer is yes, there is another clear alternative, we do not need to do this, kill the system again, because that is the lean mindset. However, if you get through this far in the process of questioning, of asking these purging questions to yourself that invite ownership and that invite a behavior and a belief of being lean, then if your answer is no to that there is no clear alternative for this, then you challenge through rapid learning, right? If you've made it from a rule, policy, or procedure all the way to, is there a clear alternative? And if the answer is no, then maybe that system and policy and procedure is meant to be in that place. And all we can do from that point on is challenge through rapid learning. So that is the playing to win quality mindset that I was talking about, that we want to embed when we think about auditing. When we think about auditing, we more often than not think about it as policing, as a procedural work, but really we should be challenging ourselves and learning rapidly. So the real problem isn't discipline, right? The real problem is how the systems are usually designed. And these systems are rule-focused. They feel like they're top-down control coming from a hierarchical organization. There's audit fatigue in people. And more often than not, they feel like they're policing or correcting someone's behavior. Systems that feel like these will always fail, because systems follow the design, which follow the behaviors that we create them with. So if we have a system that is designed in a way which enables you to support your behavior and is focused on the process, not the people, but focused on the process, and invites ownership and engagement, that system will more often than not likely thrive. So let's reframe the role of audits. We did this a little bit in the beginning, so I won't spend quite a lot of time. But think about policing. When you think of the word policing, when audit comes up, correct yourself and the people around you that it's not policing, but rather coaching. You're guiding the process, not judging the people. It's more often than not catching mistakes necessarily, but preventing drift. You're staying ahead of the curve. Before some issues arise, before firefighting has to begin, you can catch that before it becomes a problem. That preventative mindset, which is our last approach, shouldn't just be preventative, but rather proactive. You're auditing because you want to be proactive about finding issues before they arise. Instead of documentation or paperwork, think dialogue, right? We're making a conversation about something we saw, something we verified. Making expectations visible and discussing them with your teams will create that clarity with audits, not fear. And when it comes to compliance, think confidence, right? We're building the trust that the process that we're trying to develop works. And so it is really great to reframe the role of audits within yourselves and within your organization. And if any of these terms resonate with you, please share them with one of your team members in your organization. Share them with anybody you work with who think that audits create fear, not clarity. So ownership grows when accountability is layered, right? It's not when it's centralized. If one person is an owner for a system in a large organization, the system will not thrive. It's when there is collaboration and teamwork and layered approach to it that it will sustain. So let's think of it at the beginning, right? We think of operators when they're working on a production facility or a manufacturing environment, they begin their self-checking. That's the first place of ownership. Then we think about supervisors, right? People who supervise these operators. There's our second step, our second layer of auditing, where we check that they don't override the ownership necessarily, but rather enforce that ownership within the operators. We then look into managerial reviews. So managers don't audit the floor, they usually audit the system. They look into if the systems that are created by the organization, by them specifically, for example, are foolproof. We look into identification next. So identify issues and implement corrective actions as soon as these three layered approaches of accountability is done. We can finally start naming the issue, and then assigning appropriate corrective action for it. Improvements in adherence, right? So we look into adhering to procedures and standard work is obviously going to result us into early issue detection, because we wrote these improvements in standard work practices in the first place because that's how the system was supposed to be approached. And all of this culminated together leads us into enhanced product quality, right? Our quality becomes the outcome. The ownership becomes the outcome. And it reflects in the products and the systems that we develop and that we work with within the organization. So looking into the tiered approach, let's look at the first layer of this in manufacturing example. So how I implemented this in my organization was the first layer, depending on the size and the processes of organization that you want to cover, you want to begin the layer process audit with the first layer, which either does a daily or a weekly based audit, which is done by usually engineers and supervisors. And what they're really checking at the core of their audit is, are we doing the work the right way? Are we checking and doing the steps that we are supposed to do in order to get somewhere? The second layer that introduces in this is the system proofing, right? So that's where our second layer of the audit comes, and it can be done monthly. It can be done by major core departments like quality, technical, and engineering. It can be done by R&D, it can be done by operations, because these are systemic departments, systemic functions that exist. And what they're really checking at the core of their audits is this system enabling the process? It's not about the process anymore, it's about the system. So they're system proofing it. So the first layer, like I have it on my screen here, is process proofing, and the second layer we have is system proofing. And then the very third layer to this is Gemba walks, which is the third layer is done quarterly. It can be leadership enforced, right? And what leadership is really doing here by doing the Gemba walks is reinforcing their priorities. They're reinforcing the mindset that we are doing the work that we're supposed to because we have standard practices in place. And they're not necessarily checking or judging people, but rather communicating with them, collaborating with them. And audits really, when you think of it in this way, they shift the perspective of inspection and policing to learning and development. You'll be surprised to see that these levels of strengths within your organization can have such a discipline and an impact within their own realm and the organization as a whole. So that's our layer process audit approach. Now, this is an approach that's heavily done in the automotive industry, but it doesn't necessarily have to only stay in that industry. It can be cross-transferred. The company I work in and the division I work in does not make auto catalysts or automotive parts, but we make rather catalyst products. And it's a manufacturing facility, a chemical manufacturing facility at the core of it. And we've developed a layered process audit system that helps us check, that helps us process proof, system proof, and then reinforce our priorities. So that's really ensuring excellence in manufacturing and a good tiered approach to LPAs. So let's look at some purpose and benefits, right? The first line that you see here is the purpose. So some of the purpose is defect elimination, right? We see that the deviations that are occurring start reducing a little bit. We identify potential defects early to prevent major quality and safety issues. We provide immediate feedback and correction opportunities. And then we also enhance operational efficiency and compliance, because when you do start having a system of audits, you start looking at all those hidden graves that are hidden deep below in the production environment, in the manufacturing environment, because nobody addressed them. And they start coming up on the surface. They have a way to come back on surface and start creating issues. And you can really begin that early detection and start auditing. And that's the purpose of it, right? The benefits of that are reduced defect rates. My company's production lines defect rates significantly reduced as we started auditing, as we started having an assembled presence by layered process auditing, because there's more people involved in it. It's not just one person auditing. There's more departmental people involved in doing these layered process audits, and it starts developing this quality mindset in every individual who's checking it, right? Give them the power to audit the system. Increase accountability across all levels. That is by far the biggest benefit that I have seen with having layered process audits is people at all levels are talking about the product, are talking about efficiency, are talking about safety. And those are really the core concepts of why we develop a layered process audit in the first place. Is safety first, quality always, and then efficiency next, right? You're focusing on these three pillars to create these layered process audit systems. Obviously, this invites improved process standardization, as you find out that when you do these audits, when you do these layered process audits, that they find issues and gaps in paperwork. Strengthening continuous improvement culture is something that has a great benefit in this, because we're always continuously striving for improvement, and layered process auditing can do that. So let's move away from theory to reality, right? My implementation story, what I did to achieve a layered process audit in my system. Just an example so that you guys can take from this. You guys can ask me questions about it later too, and I would be more than happy to share what I did in depth. But I will be touching the surface on how all this theory was converted into a reality in my organization. So it really started with me trying to understand that audits should not create fear. They should create clarity, right? That's the purpose of why we want the audits to occur. So I created this tiered approach that I shared with you guys. And in the form of that, what I did is I started effectively communicating first with my department, with my managers, with other department individuals who I confide in about, hey, I believe if we have an audit system that is an internal layered process audit system, that we can ensure that our process is done with more clarity, and we can understand that by doing these audits. So that was my first step. Then I looked into auditor competence, right? When I mentioned that invite ownership and have people do this in your organization, it obviously has to have some coherence with competence. So I really started beginning to train people on how to layer process audit. What is layered process audit? Introducing these terms to them, introducing this auditor mindset to them, which not only helps them in their professional development in whichever department they come from, but also gives the ownership to them and checks the competence for them. So I'm checking for skilled levels across all different tiers, right? Then I looked into nonconformity ownership. So when we have nonconformances, when we have issues arise, we usually assign responsibility for those identified issues. So when I trained these people on what layered process audits are, I gave them the end goal of what happens when we do audits. One of the main things that happen when we do audits in layered process audits in an organization is we find nonconformances. And it's not just the person who found the nonconformance and said, well, I found a nonconformance, now quality can deal with it. It's more about inviting that ownership and assigning responsibility to a collaborative team of people. Then we looked into audit frequency. So obviously there's a little more tweaks that you might need to do depending on your size of organization, the structure you have within your organization, the support system. If you do not have support within top management, within your organization, this might not even be able to start off the ground. It really believes in you having some ownership with this process and also letting top management believe in this process. And what comes next is audit frequency, because that determines how much time is an individual spending out of their day from their, other than their normal routine tasks, into an audit, and what is the benefit that's reaping out of it. So you're verifying the system in a weekly and a monthly format. And what I've done is, when we do audits and I check these audits, I'm basically checking the auditor, right? I'm checking the audit. I'm looking into what is the frequency. Should I need to tweak the frequency? Do I make the audits more spaced out? Is there auditor fatigue that is happening? And that's the ownership of the system that I mentioned before. So having the system requires not just you creating the system and letting it out in the world. You have to stay in touch with the system. You have to continuously improve the system to begin with. And that leads us into a live audit list. So once you're done with all these steps, you can create a dynamic and an updated audit question list that the auditor can follow, where a half chunk of their workload is reduced already. They don't have to necessarily think of the question. They can improvise if they want to, but they have a prompt. They have a how to conduct the audit. They have a guide, because again, like I said, this is a system that requires accountability across all layers. And it's not just the person who's doing the audit to check off their name and say, well, I was supposed to do an audit on Thursday on the beginning of the production facility and the beginning of the production line, and I did it and I'm done with it now. And they don't have to have that cross off the checklist behavior, but rather, well, I have all the tools I need to do the audit, so let me do the audit and then escalate any issues that I see. So create that co-creation responsibility, right? And in, mind you, like I tried to apply this in a mid-sized manufacturing facility where my team was significantly smaller. So the team that I applied this in was smaller than 50 people, and it had 2 production lines running at the same time with multiple jobs obviously running in them. And creating this at a smaller scale is much easier than it is to create it on a larger scale. But I'm hoping that this system that I'm trying to define to you, and this methodology and the framework that I'm trying to develop here, is transferable to a large size organization. If not, I would be happy to chat about it. I'm trying to deploy the same system that I'm talking about here from the mid-size manufacturing into a larger manufacturing setting within my company, and we will see how that goes. But basically, we're looking into the key implementation, right? So the audit form is the main part of the audit. So you can create an audit form. Now that we're in the age of AI, now that we're in the age of digitalization, think of a tablet. Do not do paper and pen, because I know that could create paperwork. So the first thing I did is I took a tablet and I created Excel files, 4 or 5 Excel files that were live synced through Microsoft. And obviously this is a very rudimentary do-it-yourself kind of a system. If you had the resources to deploy the system at a larger scale, you could try to do them on Microsoft SharePoint. You could try to create a whole new platform for the auditing. I know there's a lot of EQMS and a lot of platforms within quality as an industry where you can create these audit forms, but I wanted to do something low fidelity that I could basically do from scratch and then try to implement. And I created that audit form. And while creating the audit form, I kept these focuses in my mind. So having 8 questions limited to my audit focus. That way it doesn't create an audit fatigue. It should not take you more than 20 minutes or 25 minutes of your time to complete that one audit at that one area. Your auto-correcting actions. So I basically assigned and Visual Basics coded these prompts that I will show you in a moment, and I assigned corrective actions to those. As soon as you find a conformance or an issue with the system, it tells you as the auditor what you're supposed to do next. So it just doesn't end on system identification, but rather system resolution. And then you try to fix the issues as soon as possible, right? So the system has to be designed in a way where it's not just another paperwork, it's not just another form or an Excel sheet that gets buried into the digital system, but rather it invites that resolution and that problem solving. And then timely non-compliance responses, right? So we want to make sure that they create these timely responses and these timely notifications and feedback loop between the departments on solving that issue. And you can do that by tagging and alerting the owners who are supposed to own that area or that production area. So I will go into how the form looks like. So this is the audit form that I created using Microsoft Excel. And the way I had it set up was I divided the 8 questions, like I said. You can drop down in the very first field where it says audited by and select your name. And I created these drop-down menu from Visual Basic Coding and introduced the people who are doing this on a regular basis. And the way I had structured it is around the same concept, like I mentioned, safety, quality, and efficiency, right? So I'm checking these 3 areas of a production facility, off a production line. So what happens in the production line is what is going in is what is coming out, right? If you might have heard garbage in, garbage out. So we really have to check the beginning of the process, the incoming raw materials that are going, the supplier related products that are going into the process. So my first question started with check with the inventory handler. And I mean, I've tried to condense these prompts to very low, reasonable things just to present here, but you can go as big as you want. So it starts with a prompt, which tells the auditor what they're checking, which tells the auditor what their prompt is, and then it tells you the how. So how are you checking this prompt? And you can go as detailed as you'd like. And then it also presents a purpose to this. So why? Why are you checking incoming materials? Because, well, if something is wrong with the incoming material and there's lack of traceability, or the product that is going into the line is garbage, then the product coming out of the line is also garbage. So it provides a purpose to us. And then I divided it in 3 sections, right? Out of compliance, yes or no. Issue resolved during the audit, yes or no. And then immediate corrective action. Like I mentioned, it provides the auditor a prompt on what to do next. So all of these question sets that you see with out of compliance, issue resolved, and immediate corrective action are also dropped down in that Excel format. And obviously this Excel is controlled on a tablet. Now, with the help of Visual Basics Coding, I also added this feature into my Excel where the minute you hit that plus sign to generate a new sheet, it auto-populates these questions from the master sheet that is protected in my Excel. So nobody can go around and mess around with the master sheet of this audit form, but rather they can generate another sheet which will copy these questions, and you can put in the date when the audit was done and then complete this audit questionnaire, which is these 8 audits. If there are out of compliance issues, so for example, if in the first question of this audit, if the incoming raw material was a problem and it was out of compliance, well, it tells you that the immediate corrective action is to inform production supervisor. So as an auditor who's auditing and finding this issue, it is your responsibility to escalate the issue, to stop when you see something happening wrong, right? See something, say something kind of a mentality within quality. And what you can do, what I've encouraged my organization to do, is also use the app feature within Excel where you can comment. So in the comment here, I've provided a section where people can type comments, but within Excel, you can do live commenting with the help of OneDrive. If your organization uses Microsoft and is synced in with it, you can just add somebody and call them out in their name and say, well, this is a problem, this was out of conformance. So for example, if I was using this audit form and I saw an issue with the raw material, it says inform production supervisor, I would just add them, it would email them, escalate it to them, and then we would know what to do from there next. The very last thing is the Gemba walks, and this is a very familiar concept with people who have knowledge of the lean mentality, the Six Sigma mentality, and just continuous improvement in general, right? We want these visual tools to communicate process abnormalities and business performance. Gemba walk literally means go see. You're going into the process and checking it, and this really begins with planning, going into observing, creating a report, and then closing the findings. So leadership can develop a framework or a plan. What I encourage leadership in my company is to create this once in 2 months. So bi-monthly frequency of creating walk, where they go out, they plan before they do the walk on what area they're going to be checking or what area they're going to be going and seeing, observing their findings, compiling them in the form of any form of report that they would like, right? If they want to write a note, if they want to write a Word document, a PowerPoint presentation because they took pictures. I mean, I've had within my organization during the Gemba walks, management take concerns with 5S. Managers take concerns with safety, take pictures of those and compile them in a report in a PowerPoint, and then closing that feedback loop with the other layers, right? It's not just a top-down system. It's a pyramidal structure where audits begin from the bottom and go to the top. It has to have a two-way street to this. It has to have a feedback loop which is closed. So if there were issues that were seen in the Gemba walk that could be relayed down to layer 2, and then it could be relayed down to layer 1 again. And that really creates that ownership. That really creates that mindset. So let me check in with you guys before I go further on how you guys are doing. Before I go further, it is 1:44. So in the sense of time, I do want to see what is out there in the chat. Awesome. Okay. If you guys can hear me all right, I will finish up this deck and then we can go into questions real quick. So we mentioned Gemba walks, and then I wanted to share with you guys just a very realistic iteration to this, right? So I piloted this last year within my company, and it took me 3 months over time to deploy the system. And I wanted to share with you real insights and results on how it happened. So when I planned this, when I created these audits on Excel for different workstations, for different production lines within my company, I created an audit schedule on who's supposed to be auditing when. And I assigned it, I trained these individuals who would be doing my audit, and I provided them a day of the week, of the month that they would be doing these audits to create that clarity and that ownership. When we did that, we planned that layer 1 audits in my pilot would have 72 planned audits, layer 2 would have 16 planned audits, and layer 3 would have 2 planned audits. Like I said, layer 3 is that once in 2 month iteration. So the amount of total planned LPAs that I hoped we would achieve would be 90. And within my first trial of this, what I actually found was layer 1 only was able to complete 44 audits, layer 2 was able to complete 11, and layer 3 completed both of their audits they were supposed to. At even that given point, we had completed 57 audits, right? 57 actual layered process audits is no small feat when you see that for the most part, you start finding issues, right? And the completion rate overall, if I compared with all 3 layers on average, was 76%, which isn't the worst, but it tells me as the system owner that there is something else that I need to tweak in the system to make sure that we reach that higher completion rate, that we reach that better completion rate, right? And what we found out in terms of findings was layer 1 had 39 findings in total with all the LPAs it did. Layer 2 had, and layer 3 had multiple findings that we couldn't quantify because there were more observations in Gemba box. You weren't checking them against a questionnaire or something like that. But overall, we found that there were more than 50 findings. If you see the proportion of actual LPAs to total findings, that is an amazing finding rate. That means there could have been 53 times there could have been 53 times where there would be an issue, but we caught that issue beforehand. But we solved that issue beforehand, right? And I just wanted to share with you, within my production facility, we have 5 working cells, and how I could narrow down issues coming from 2 cells, right? I could narrow down, okay, well, cell 3 and cell 4 has about 13 or 14 of these findings. That means something's going wrong every time there's an audit over there. So it really exposed the challenges, it exposed documentation inconsistencies, it exposed delays and corrective actions that were supposed to be done. And there were a lot of positive changes that came out of this. So how do you make this your story, right? And I can go into this in depth later or share information with you too. But in the interest of time, I want to take you to the last slide, which is quality sticks when people believe that systems were built for them. Ownership grows when accountability is layered and not centralized. And you can design audits to reinforce clarity, not compliance. So if you want to learn more about this, if you want to hear more of my story, you can scan that QR code. It will take you through to my socials and connect you with me in case you are interested to. That is my email here as well. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. What is the biggest watch out for layered auditing? That is a great question. The biggest watch out for layered auditing is there's a common pitfall that organizations don't get the leadership involved in this process, and there is no system ownership, like I mentioned. The biggest watch out that I have noticed organizations have within layered auditing is audit fatigue. A lot of the times when auditors are using the same audit checklist again and again over an extended period of time or frequency, there is a lot of audit fatigue, and they stop looking at the problems because it feels repetitive. So as a system owner, it's your duty, or if you are the system owner, it's your prerogative to look into the audit system. So every 3 months, I will actually audit the LPA system. I will audit the process of this auditing framework that I just shared with you, because I have to maybe update the questions. I have to maybe look into the findings. I may have to escalate findings, right? I may have to report it to leadership, get managerial buy-in, So it's really one of those biggest watch outs. I will be sharing the PowerPoint presentation as well, but that will take a little more time as I intend to present this at the Lean Six Sigma conference. And if you are attending that, feel free to drop in my session and learn more about this as well. The implementation of Layered auditing in ISO 9000, do you have it in the work instructions or is it reference only? Jenny asked that, I believe. I'm not 100% sure what your question is, Jenny, in this, but essentially, layered process auditing is not a requirement in ISO 9001. ISO 9001 doesn't tell you that you should be doing layered process auditing. However, it does mention internal auditing, which is a completely separate topic. Internal auditing is an internal audit program that your organization should have. Either you do it internally or hire an external service to do system audits for you. This is a completely different concept. It's called layer auditing, and it's used mostly in the automotive industry. It can be difficult to find good questions on higher level leadership, not fully understand the scope of their work. What are they looking for? So higher level leadership is basically looking for interacting with the operators, asking the operators, hey, what are you checking here? Can you show me how to do this? It invites ownership and accountability when leadership asks not questions related to policing, but rather interact with the operations. They interact with the system. They observe the system. So leadership getting into a Gemba walk, it's really hard to find good questions. I agree, which is why they're supposed to do Gemba walks instead of following an audit checklist, because for the most part, what they would be doing is looking at the process from a 40,000-foot view, right? They're looking at the system of the process. So that's what I would recommend. But there are core concepts that leadership could focus on. And I'm 100% sure, Brooke, in your context, if you're, with whatever environment you are in, you can use artificial intelligence to integrate on what kind of questions should leadership look for, right? So I would recommend that. How do you recommend preventing pencil whipping of layered process audits when the supervisor, oh, that's a great question. Cody, that's an amazing question. I have seen in my experience and observation that a lot of the times supervisors just pencil whip. They just fill out the audit. They literally just don't even do a walk around. It's usually those problems that are common pitfalls that you should talk to the supervisor about. Address it head on. Ask them why they're pencil whipping it. Do they not see value in that? Right? And it goes back to that mindset shift that needs to happen within not just you, but your supervisors. It needs to happen within your organization as a whole. And maybe they're pencil whipping it because the system is not designed for them. Maybe they're pencil whipping it because they actually don't have any value. So you can go back into reviewing the system, review the audit questionnaire. Is it even valid right now? Is it applicable in your context anymore? So you could definitely address the problem head on, talk to your supervisor, assess the system, assess the questionnaire. That really should help you in avoiding pencil whipping. It is important to not equalize a Gemba walk with an audit. That is very true, Pia. You mentioned that it should really be focused on improvement opportunities instead of being another form of audit. I 100% agree with that. It's just within layer process auditing, the last layer in the top block is the Gemba walk because it tells you the layers of the system that are involved in the Gemba, that are involved in layer process audits. Gemba walks are separate from auditing in general, but Gemba walks are a part of layer process audits. So think of it as a dotted line. They're not directly related to each other, but they have a dotted line of accountability and ownership between the entire organization. Audits should identify system failures, opportunities for production to improve the system, not just a series of errors to address. I 100% agree, Amy. 100% agree on that. As such, the system is still failing, not effectively managing the design quality assurances, which actually ensures compliance. Barry, I think that is absolutely right. A lot of the times when you identify issues and you check corrective actions or you look at SOPs, they fail because they are not designed properly. They fail because they're not designed for the people. Instead of designing it for quality assurance or maintaining a checklist or crossing off the fact that it was done in ISO 9001, check that it's designed for the people. So that's great. Audits are supposed to check how well operations are identifying issues and implementing corrective actions. They do not implement corrective actions. Well, they can implement corrective actions that are almost immediate, but then there could be long-term corrective actions from that as well. Audit would see a decline, right? Debbie brings up a great point early on in the presentation is that if audit systems do not exist, what could that do? And during COVID, we must have seen that, right? We must have seen that audit systems failed and declined our quality process because we couldn't check or validate. There was no stage gate on somebody checking the work or the process or the system. When you take the guardrails off, it is not good. Your ball will probably go to the gutter. So have the guardrails on. Great feedback, great presentation. Awesome. I love that. Thank you.